Hey, and welcome to a new unit. This is 2.1, the video for our first lesson, the first video for our first lesson in the second unit. Students will be able to read chapter 1 of OMOM, that's short for Of Mice and Men, and understand its historical context and setting. So let's get started. First of all, the question you should have in mind as you're watching this video is, who is John Steinbeck and what was going on in the 1930s? Because that is what we're going to be all about for this unit. John Steinbeck is our author. He is from and wrote about the Salinas River Valley, which is northern California. I know it doesn't look real far north, but it's much farther north than LA, San Diego. So it's more northern California, and the time period is 1930s. So we've moved from A Raisin in the Sun, which took place in the 1950s in Chicago, Illinois, to 1930s California. All right, let's learn a little bit about this John Steinbeck. You've probably heard of him. He's one of the most famous American authors. He lived from 1902 to 1968. And he spent most of his time writing about this area, the Salinas River Valley in California. He wrote about the people not usually in books, the poor, the struggling, and the reality of the times. The times were tough during the 1930s. We'll talk about that in a sec. He first wrote Tortilla Flat. He's a little bit like our last author, Lorraine Hansberry, in that he left college early, didn't graduate from college. For Steinbeck, he was at Stanford, and went on instead to write and really found his calling there. And Tortilla Flat was his first book, and it was an unusual success. It was really popular, and people were kind of like, why is this book so popular? Because it was about a group of men who were considered winos in the book, and who were barely getting by in life. Of Mice and Men, you'll see too, is about the working class. It's not about the upper class. It is about regular folks, kind of like the last play that we read. The Grapes of Wrath is probably his best known book. And he wrote, I've got my dates wrong. Of Mice and Men was 1937. The Grapes of Wrath is 1939. So this is the one that's probably best known, The Grapes of Wrath, and he won a Pulitzer for it. But Of Mice and Men is also very well known, and also much shorter than The Grapes of Wrath. So that's a good thing about it. He wrote also more than 20 other novels over the course of his life. He died in 1968 of a heart attack. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962. The Nobel Prize is the highest award that an author can receive, and it's given for an author's his whole life's work. So it's not just for one text, but rather for all of them. All right, the time period of this book is the Great Depression, and you've heard about this before. It's hard to relate to the Great Depression in a lot of ways, since we didn't live through it. I didn't live through it. My parents didn't even live through it. It happened that long ago that probably your grandparents didn't live through it. So we have to kind of remind ourselves what was going on during that time period. It was the most severe economic downturn in American history. Worse than anything you and I have ever seen. In the 1930s, it began with the stock market crash of 1929, and since then, different things have been put into place so something like that doesn't happen again. We might have severe economic downturns, but it won't be because of the same kinds of problems with the stock market as what happened in 1929. And it really lasted until American involvement in World War II in the 1940s. So it lasted more than a decade. Unemployment rose to 30%, and these people were trying to find jobs, and they could not find jobs. So 3 out of 10 people could not find a job. 50% of commercial banks failed. What does that mean? Well, the bank said, hey, we're out of money. If you put your money in that bank, you might be out of luck. You might be out of that money too. Crop prices fell by 50%. So if farmers were getting $1 for a bushel, now they were getting 50 cents for a bushel. Overproduction led to unemployment. So they're producing a lot of things in factories, but then also food and produce. And there was more than what people could buy or use. And so then people were out of work. Hunger, despair, poverty, homelessness, millions of Americans had their lives destroyed during this time. Here are some images we have in the Southwest, the Dust Bowl, which was a drought that lasted for years that led to basically not being able to farm the land anymore, and there just being dust everywhere. Here's a banker trying to get money from these folks who are living in this home who don't have any. Here is a family who has lost their farm, and they are on the road. They're migrant workers trying just to survive, and they've made a tent camp there. All right, let's talk about migrant workers. Before technology created farm machinery, humans had to do most of the farm work by hand. So between the 1880s and the 1930s, thousands of men would travel the countryside in search of work. This was a common thing. We still have migrant laborers now, but even more existed in this time period. Such work included harvesting crops, doing odd jobs at farms and ranches, and whatever work was needed. These workers wouldn't earn a whole lot, maybe $2.50 or $3 a day, plus food and shelter. During the 1930s, since the unemployment rate was so high, there were agencies set up to send farm workers to where they were needed. And in the novel, we will see the two main characters, George and Lenny, were given work cards from Murray and Reddy's in this first reading, which was one of the farm work agencies. And that's what leads them to Soledad, the name of the farm that they arrive at the beginning of the book. Well, what are some key topics in the book? First of all, the exploitation of migrant workers or itinerant workers. Exploitation means taking advantage. So how these workers were treated unfairly and taken advantage of. The failure of the American dream. And so we've talked about how the American dream didn't work always the way that it was supposed to work because of issues of race. We'll see other ways the American dream fails in this book. America's general moral decline. People not caring as much about others and acting without morals. The book was published in 1937. Few people were writing about the poor, but Steinbeck was not afraid to do so. And that's what he does in this book of Mice and Men. I hope that you enjoy the first 16 pages as you read them. Make sure you answer the questions in 2.1 as you read. Good luck.